Auntie Flora?
That's Auntie Flora. How are you?
Hi, Auntie Flora. Good to see you.
Same here.
How are you related? How's that?
It's my
Where?
niece. By love, just by love.
Right.
love.
Doesn't get better than that. Nice,
Great.
nice. Great. All righty. All right. With God's help, we will
I said
proceed.
it was a parent.
So
Better
here
than the
again,
second.
anybody with background noise, please
You will
mute.
stop.
Otherwise, please don't mute. We are going to move off our script a little bit tonight. And when I say that, I want to reference the following. Many of us have been learning together now, thank God, for a number of months. And then it's been, I know for me personally, very enjoyable. And it's my approach to the learning is a full picture and steps on a path. So each class stands on its own, but it's each part of an overall educational vision and hope. And that we, at the end of a period of time, we have the ability to put several pieces together that stand on their own well and provide good insight. But when they're together, they provide a complete mosaic of how we can get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to ourselves, enjoy life more, and just harvest a lot of what the Torah offers. Tonight's class was not in the rotation planned, but after the outreach of some people and just struggling with it, I thought it would be nice in our style, in our way, the way that's been defined by our group, in terms of learning and interactive and balanced and sharing and open and critical and rigorous in terms of the points, that we would discuss it tonight and learn and understand more. It's what I hope to provide tonight is really Rashi Perakim, meaning more highlights than it is drilling deep. And that's not because I don't want to drill deep. I'd like very much to do that. But I felt that let's provide the highlights so maybe we get a better understanding of everything that's going on right now in our community. And then we can decide, together with your input, I'm happy to decide if there are areas that you want to dig deeper into or not. So I want to, we broke it up into three areas. First of all, the role of each of us, the role of the people. We're going to start with that in a backwards fashion, and I'll tell you how in a minute. The second part is the how and the what. What is this Gett thing all about? How did it come into be? How could something so seemingly awful, how did it come to be in Judaism, and where is it? And the third step is, how do we protect our children and ourselves? Now, as I said, in each of them, we're not going to be able to get a full picture. My hope and plan is that we'll get enough of each of them to be able to speak to what's going on right now and to be able to set parameters based on which we can understand the issue, approach the issue in a healthy and somewhat well-informed way, and most importantly, know how to approach situations to prevent something like this happening. Okay, I want to start with a story of a lady who is not Jewish. She, her name, difficult name to pronounce. She's Polish. Her name is Stanislawa Leknoska. She's a lady that was trained as a nurse. And when the Nazis invaded Poland, her 4 children and husband worked to sneak food to the Jews in the ghetto, to provide them false documents and so on. In 1943, their efforts were discovered. Her husband and one of the boys ran away. I'm sorry, she has a daughter as well. The husband was ultimately killed by the Nazis in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. They're not Jewish, but he was involved in that, which is interesting. She and one of her daughters were taken to Auschwitz. When they were taken to Auschwitz, she introduced herself as a nurse, as a maternity ward helper. not necessarily a nurse, but a maternity ward helper. So we know that over 1 million people were murdered in Auschwitz. And what was typically the case with women who came pregnant is they would generally murder them on the spot. They just simply didn't want to deal with it. To the extent that they let them live, to the extent that they let them live, they would either put them in some type of separate incarceration, or they would put them in a hospital. Then they would allow them to have the baby. Then they would drown or murder the baby in front of the woman herself. That was part of the Nazi atrocity. What this lady did is she was able to serve in one of these wards in Auschwitz, and she is credited with saving 3,000 babies. Now, to qualify that, meaning that she enabled those Jewish mothers to give birth to these children. They believe that about 1,000 of those babies died of starvation or cold or disease. 500 were sent to other families. They believe in total, which is a little known fact, that about 100,000 Jewish babies from World War II were stolen by the Nazis and sent to non-Jewish families to be brought up as non-Jews. So of the 3,000 she helped get born, 1,000 died, 500 were given to others, and they believe that probably about 30 survived the camps. Now, this lady was part of the death march when the Nazis were retracting, were surrendering. She refused to go on the death march, stayed at the camp, and ultimately survived. Now, what she did, her great chesed, and why the Catholic Church is considering giving her some special notification, is that she made sure to enable these Jewish women to give birth to their babies, and then she would remove the babies if the babies were to be killed or the baby caught a quick cold or disease. She would remove the baby so the young mother wouldn't see the baby die. Okay, that's tzidkut. That's true sainthood, and it really is. It really is sainthood. Why am I bringing her up? Because she is a wonderful story about an extraordinary individual, but the real part of the story is that there were 100,000 Jewish women who enabled themselves to get pregnant and had the hope of bringing forth children under the Nazi occupation. That's a spectacular fact. That speaks to something great and unique. So I want to set that as the bar for the first part of the conversation. The first part of the conversation is, what do people do? Yeah, Bobby.
Yeah, it's reminds me of Mitzrayim,
Fantastic.
right?
Fantastic. That's exactly where we're going to go. We're going to
Okay.
go in reverse order. Beautiful. We're going to go in reverse order. Excellent. We have a concept, to Bobby's point, that geulot, that redemptions of the Jewish people, are enabled by the women. I brought this as a case in point to show the courage of women in the most horrific of modern times. Let's go back 1,000 years or so. Time of Hanukkah, there are several different stories of women. Yehudit, who killed Sisra, Hannah with her 7 children, and a particularly interesting story about a lady by the name of Hannah, who was a daughter of Matitya. Matitya, as we know, was the head of the Hashmonaim, of the Maccabim. At the time, if you remember, one of the edicts that was imposed on the Jewish people is that if some Jewish young girl was engaged to be married, they would take her to an officer, and the officer would rape her the night before her wedding. And that was part of what the Romans had in place at the time. So what ended up happening? People stopped getting married. rather than force these women to be in that situation, they stopped getting married. But that was the intent. That was the intent. What better way to wipe out the Jewish people? And to Bobby's point, we'll talk about how the Egyptians did it in a couple of minutes. This young lady, Hannah, was at a great gathering. They say it was a gathering of the greatest men of the generation, Matitya and all the Sadiqim, all the giants of the generation. And there are different versions to the story, but we're going to go with the version that she ripped her own clothing and exposed part of her body in front of all of these pious men. And Matitya and his sons got so angry that they said they were going to take her and punish her, maybe with the punishment of death, for exposing herself in front of all of these men. And she stands up and she says, wait, here you are waiting to murder me for me being exposed innocently, having done nothing wrong in front of you. But when your daughters are dragged off to be raped by the enemy, you stand idly by. Or worse, you allow this to go to a point where it will wipe the Jewish people out. And as a result of that, our rabbis say, Matitya and his sons started the war that ultimately became the War of Hanukkah. And what's most fascinating about it is this is one of the several stories about women that are attributed to what sparked the revolt that ended up giving us the ability to reclaim the Beit HaMikdash, and most importantly, to reclaim Torah Shebe'al Peh, the oral law. Let's go back a little bit further. The holiday of Purim, that's a slam dunk. We know that one, right? It was Esther or out. There was nobody else doing it, right? Mordechai with all his power, all the great men of the great assembly, what was left of those with their power. Who did it come down to? A lady. But let's go to Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is absolutely fascinating. We know the midrash that says that the women used to go out into the fields in the middle of the day with barrels of water and these tiny fish that they used to feed their husbands who were enslaved. And they would be close to the men, and they would encourage the men to be with them, because the men had already given up. And if it wasn't for the women, not much different than the young lady in the Warsaw Ghetto or under the occupation of the Nazis, if it wasn't for the women who said, we will not give up, the men would have given up. So our rabbis say that the Geulah from Egypt is to the zchut based on the merit of Nashim Tzadkaniyot, righteous women. But that's only the glossy part of the story. It gets even more interesting. We know that Miriam, Moshe Rabbeinu's sister, right? She went to her father, right? Who knows the story about Miriam? She went to her father and told him what? What'd she tell him, Bobby? You're nodding your head.
She's so wasn't her father like the priest or something?
Right? He was one of the leaders of the Jewish people in Egypt, right?
And didn't she tell him, you're worse than Paro if you're not allowing them to yeah.
Paro said he's going to destroy the boy babies. You're precluding everybody from having children. You're worse than Paro. Your edict, so to speak, is worse than Paro. So you could say that without Miriam, there never would have been a Moshe, because his parents wouldn't have been put back together. Our rabbis clearly say that the one who built the basket that Moshe was put in to attempt to save him was his sister. We know that the people who were watching him were his sister and his mother. We know the person who nursed him was female as well. But it gets better.
His mother, actually.
We know that, that took care of him. Bat Paro was female, right? His mother nursed him, right? But it gets better. We know that Shifra and Pu'ah, right? The two midwives, and that essentially set up the first Jewish maternal underground, where they did what this lady did in World War II. They made every effort to save the babies. And our rabbis say that they saved thousands and thousands of children, guiding the women to go out into the fields, to give birth in the fields. And the Midrash says that somehow the women giving birth in the fields ended up either being covered by the sand or being covered by foliage, and they were able to give birth to their children. But who inspired that? Shifra and Pu'ah. And finally, we know that when Moshe Rabbeinu was coming back to Egypt to help the Jewish people, we know that he was attacked by a serpent in a very, very mysterious portion in the parasha. And who saved him? His wife Zipporah. So our rabbis say unequivocally that the movement in Judaism, growth in Judaism, Geulah, redemption in Judaism, has to be led by the women. And our rabbis say that Elu Shega'alu, those that led the redemption in the past, will always lead the redemption. And in fact, so far it's been true throughout Jewish history. We know by the splitting of the sea, it was the women who took up the instruments first and sang. We know that by Matan Torah, we know that our rabbis say, Ko tomar lebeit Yaakov v'tagid ibnei Israel. Speak to the women first, and then speak to the men. And we're all very much aware, in the Mishkan, it was the women donating first. Good. What's the upshot for our conversation? The upshot is very straightforward and simple. A woman doesn't have to have an expertise in the laws of Gittin in order to express her fears, her concerns, and her insights. Judaism is built on the expression of the individual. That individual was spoken to, we believe, with each individual was spoken to in his own voice, in his own language at Ma'amad Har Sinai, by Mount Sinai, so that God could establish once and forever that he has and wants and will always desire and maintain a relationship with each individual. Therefore, if we want our community to grow, if we want our Jewish people in general to grow, we have to first and foremost inspire, encourage, strengthen, educate, support our women to express themselves and their needs and their dreams. A woman has a clearer set of perspectives than a man. She's less self-manipulating. She's the pinnacle of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's creation. She has the clearest view and understanding of life. Our job as the men in their lives, so to speak, their spouses, their teachers, their sons, is to enable them, is to embolden them, is to help them grow and to give them their voice. So, part one of the conversation, and I want to open the floor now to your thoughts. Part one of the conversation, I want to be very clear on this from a Torah perspective. And we're going to talk about the qualifications in a minute. But from a Torah perspective, from an overall perspective of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu framed his world, there's no question that the woman has an absolutely pivotal role, has to be supported and given her voice. And there's absolutely no question that the individual has a pivotal role. And we love our leaders and we revere our rabbis, and we need to support them because they sacrifice themselves for the community. But supporting them never means losing myself. And from my particular perspective, whatever changes came about, it was because of the will of the people. And what we're witnessing is the strength of the people, particularly the strength of the women and their voices. Open floor. What do you guys say? What do you think?
Ricky, I have something to say.
Hey, Debbie, how are you?
Fine, thanks. How you doing?
Good, good.
I'm
Nice to
listening,
welcome you back.
but I'm more quiet on this Zoom because
Okay,
there's a lot of people I don't necessarily know. So I understand everything you're saying, and I like how it's tying into Pesach and everything that's going on. I think that what's happening now, particularly in this community, is it's wonderful, but at the same time, it's disturbing to know that for so many years, this has been going on and left unchecked for so many women who maybe wanted to have babies for so many years, and the husbands used it as a weapon against them. Of course, there's another side too, that maybe, the women weren't perfect either, but regardless, when the marriage is over and it's dead and the girl wants the divorce, the get, then I think it should be given. And at the same time, I think a lot of results were had now because of the women. But at the same time, and this is all maybe hearsay because I'm only seeing it on social media, I'm not involved at all. So maybe what I'm seeing is not necessarily a true depiction of what's happening. But they're saying that there's no, I don't know what this means, no room for the women at the table, or the women shouldn't have a say, or it's only men deciding and it's not fair.
I'm not following the social media. It's not my thing, but I think it has great value, particularly in this case. And should anybody be saying that there's no room for women at the table, that needs to be rethought. And my whole point in this section is to affirm what you're saying, Debbie, and that is that even if people say that, and God forbid if that carries the day at this point in the community,
Right.
It can't be accepted by any of the women in this community, should not be accepted. Sometimes it takes time for the right thing to happen, but that doesn't mean a voice should be muted. So Bagadol, the big picture is that we are not an autocracy. We're very much a vibrant, individual-based society. That's what Judaism is. We talked, some of us, about the Machaneh a few weeks ago, how the Machaneh is based on absolute individuality, coalescing, competing, conflicting. That's what Judaism is. So if you close my voice, or I attempt to shut your voice down, we've destroyed Judaism. Sometimes people are afraid. So what do? We don't run away because someone's afraid. We keep going. And truth wins out. And you're absolutely right. Why this took as long as it did, it's heartbreaking and it's terrible. And we all have to carry a portion of the blame. All of us. We're all responsible. We all know about it. We didn't stand in the street and scream and yell 10 years ago or 20 years ago, whatever. But that doesn't mean that we're bad people or that our voices today should be muted.
And they're saying not to stand in the street anymore, that they don't want any of these protests.
We're gonna talk
But
about.
I think that it yielded a lot of results. Maybe it should be peaceful protests, not egging people's houses.
I'm gonna give you the halachic perspective on that, so that you understand what they're saying.
Okay.
Good? I'll give it to you in a minute.
Yes.
Who's they, by the way? When we talk, Debbie, how you doing? It's Zeke. but
Hi, how are you?
what who's they when we say they? The who?
No,
Like
Zeke,
me?
Zeke,
Are
I
you
don't want to
asking
go there.
me?
I don't want to go there.
You don't want to.
I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there because I don't want to go there.
Okay.
I know I hear your point. I hear
Yes.
it.
Yep.
And it's painful to me as well, but I don't want to go there.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
Okay.
Back on mute.
Okay. No.
Do
you
you
have to be
think,
back
do you
up.
think it was a result,
Hey, Lisa, how are
do you think it was a result from COVID that this came about? Because there's not so many parties and focusing
I don't
and
know. I don't know why it came about.
Everything adds to it. I think everything contributes to where things boil over.
Could
You know.
Could be. So let's start with the following perspective. Judaism is about the individual. Never, ever should anyone, particularly a woman's voice, be silenced, ever. Okay? So that's section A, mandate A. Now, we got it? We're clear on that, right? Now, good. Now, let me tell you the other side and what the halachic considerations are. Again, we're doing it b'mi'ut, rashi perakim. We're doing it highlighted. We're not doing it ba'omek, but we're doing enough for us to grow in terms of our understanding of this issue. So the Gemara says that a person, and Harambam really brings it down, not the Gemara, Harambam brings it down in the laws of divorce, where he says, Shelo yigaresh ha'ish ela b'rtsono, that a man shouldn't divorce a lady other than willfully. Now, I want you to listen very carefully here. I want you to listen very carefully. A woman should not divorce a lady other than if it's his will to do so. Now, Gemara, there's a Gemara that says differently. Masechet Arachin says that makinoto ad she'omer rotze ani. We beat him until he says, I want to do it. It sounds like they're saying two different things, but they're not. Tell me why they're not. And here's where the rub is. Zeke, why aren't they?
Until he realizes that this is really what he should have wanted, is what you're saying, right?
Go further. Use the same words. Lo yigaresh ha'ish ela birtsono. The man can't divorce other than if he's doing it willingly. What does the Gemara say? Beat him
Right.
until he willingly says, I want to do it.
Beat sense into him, right? That's
So now let me tell you the concern of the rabbis so that we understand it. And again, remember, section A, voices must never, particularly women's voices, ever be muted. And to Debbie's point, let's take this as a wake-up call that whenever any of us in our roles as parents, spouses, grandparents, community people, let something go under the rug, that we don't do that again. Okay. Let's talk about the halachic challenge and the nuance here. The nuance is that according to Rambam, and the rabbis struggle with this, if someone divorced a lady against his will, the get is pasul. The get is invalid. What does that mean? It means that she's still married to him. You hear it? So,
No, do you mind that I'm so disturbed by everything.
Okay. So that's why, Sari, and I hear that. And that's why I deliberated for 2 days until I decided to teach this class and not the class I planned, because I understand where everybody is right now. And that's why I want you to stay with me and I want you to hear it, because we in this group, in my opinion in particular, we have to have an educated voice. And this is a complex thing. I don't want anybody to back down. And that's why I put section 1 as section 1. The voices must be heard. But I want you to hear this halachic issue that can't be ignored.
Ricky. What you say? Go ahead.
Why is the Torah's perspective through the men's eyes? I don't understand.
Okay. I don't know, and I can't answer the question. I can't. I don't know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was thinking. And for any of us to try to go there isn't going to get us very far. But I hear it, and it pains me too. It pains me too. How does the master of the universe, who could see everything for all time, how does he do it this way? I don't know.
Ricky.
I can't answer it.
Right.
But yeah, Erwin. How are you, Erwin? We missed you last week. What, were you goofing off?
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much.
Too. So I just wanted to bring, because I'm hearing everybody's comments are great. So my general thing is that in all situations like this, I mean, when things come about, like you say, it should have happened before. You can't go into rewind. But don't you feel like when any of these breakthrough situations happen, it's a tipping point, and that's when the movement starts and the accelerator goes. But my thing is, if Hashem made this, is this tipping point a wake up to him to maybe move it around?
I don't know, but I appreciate your perspective. I think it's a wake up to us. I'm going to give you another example. I got a call yesterday about a what's it called? Social media abuse. I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked. Maybe this conversation took place because, to your point, Erwin, there was a tipping point in this thing. And it's time to stop these things that were brushed under the rug for all this time. And I believe that's true. And that's why I'm
Excuse
going
me,
to
the social media was regarding this issue?
No, no.
Oh,
it's
something else.
altogether different. But-
Okay, fine.
But that brought great pain into the lives of somebody in our community. Great pain. Completely unjust, and completely brushed under the rug. So that's why I want to say again, and I'm sorry to sound.
You're talking about like a rumor or something that was spread through social media that hurt somebody.
Right, exactly.
Oh.
So I want to say again, the voices must not be muted. Now, to Sarah's point, we have at the same time, we must work within the constructs of halakha. We must, and we do, and we want to. And that's part of the challenge and the opportunity that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us here. So, Sari, when the language of the Gemara and later of the Rishonim, of our great early rabbis, is that the man has to want to do it. Now we have a question. If someone is the victim of a aggressive rally, again, point one, I'm not backing down on point one, stay with me. The voices must never be muted. But when someone is the victim of an aggressive rally, which he very well deserved, he should have got it 10 times worse, does that move him to a point where he gave the get against his will, in which case she's still halachically married?
She has the get, but she's still halachically married.
Because the get is pasul, Zeke. The get is invalid.
So when can I just clarify, when you say we have to stay within the confounds of the halacha, that's important. You're also, are you saying that because everybody here, I mean, not everybody here, but I know certainly for me, you want to hear somebody say, we're going to do away with the get, right? People want to hear that kind of thing happen, and that's what is meant by we have to stay within the confounds of the halacha. We can't take the get away.
No.
Right?
No, here's what we're going to do.
That's too radical.
Here's what we're going to do. No, we can't take a getaway because
Right.
we're within the contracts of halacha.
Right.
But the more knowledgeable we become, hi Joe, the more knowledgeable we become about that, the more powerful we could be.
Right.
Back to point one, the power of the individual. So,
Ricky,
yeah.
is it's not going to happen, but the way we read the Torah's actual sentence could be wrong. It says, if the man suspects the wife, he is to write the get. And give her a letter. Give her the letter to get. It doesn't say it as an option to him. You can read it as a commandment to the man.
If
You don't have to read it as
he
an option.
suspects her of what? If he suspects her
of
doing something inappropriate. You're right.
That's the way it's. That's
a unique case. We're not talking about that case.
That's right. But it continues on to say, then he shall write a letter and give her and release her.
In that case, we're not talking about that she did something wrong, that she hid away with another man.
It's irrelevant. She did something wrong with that, but it says he's supposed to give. It's a commandment if he suspects her. Even it's a commandment. It's not an option.
But he doesn't suspect her in our case. He doesn't suspect her, right? Let's say he doesn't suspect her. Let's say it's a typical bad marriage, and he doesn't suspect anything, and so the idea of a contract's validity is a real halachic idea. Again, I'm not.
Does the Torah allude to a moment? I'm sorry, Ricky. I know I disturbed you just now, but what does the Torah allude to an optional get anywhere?
Step by step. Let's go step by step.
Okay.
Great.
Yep.
Hi, Stephen. How are you?
Sorry.
Great to see you.
Do we see anywhere else in the Torah where we have this issue of, let's say, coercion to do something? Not necessarily with the get, but maybe with some other contract or some sort of agreement.
So let's do this. Stephen. I want to answer your point and some of what's being verbalized, but I'm going to answer it not exactly in how you, Joey, Shami, and so on are asking it, but I think you're gonna get what you need, and then we can take the conversation to the next step. So the law does allow that if the man is a leper, or he has some other sort of skin disease, or he has some illness that makes his body odor bad perpetually, or his breath bad perpetually, then he has to give the wife a get. So,
Ricky,
yeah.
could I just interject for 1 minute?
Uh-huh.
What about if in the moment that he signed the get, or he did whatever he was supposed to do in order for the get to be had, in that moment, he wanted to give the get for whatever reason, for the protest, or no, meaning
Yeah.
you said if the people were protesting and then he gave the get, it might not be willful, but in the moment that he
Right.
did it, it was willful.
But that's the issue. That's why the rabbis are struggling. That's why the rabbis are struggling. I think their message should have been nuanced and more credit to the people as we're discussing it now, to explain to them that a get by force is not a get. At the same time, the question that the rabbis bring based on the Gemara that I just mentioned is, when we say that if the man has certain bad things going on about him, that has to give the get. It's not a willful thing anymore. It doesn't have to be miritzono, but we force him to give a get. Right? He has leprosy. He has a skin disease. He has horrific body odor or breath odor. He can't have children. Then we force him to give a get. Well, what if he abuses her? Can we also force him to give a get?
Anything objectionable, I think that's what they're trying to bring out. If he has an objectionable way about him,
Beautiful.
right?
So now that's the question that we ask on that Gemara. Is that, are those examples specific and unique examples, or are they examples of?
I see.
Now,
Right.
if you say that the Gemara is only talking about those 5 or 6 things, if you say the Gemara is only talking about those 5 or 6 things, Gemara, you can't force a guy to give a get other than in those 5 or 6 things. But if the Gemara is giving an example of an untenable situation, the guy is beating her, the guy is a bad father, the guy is verbally abusive, whatever, if it's representative but not specific, then you could say, of course you give it a get. The guy's a horror story. These issues have not been firmly resolved in Jewish law. They have
By
not.
the rabbis.
Right. There are
By the
people
rabbis.
who are on either side of this issue. Some people say it's got to be willing. So no.
But is there any reference where it says don't? I don't think there is. There's no place where it says
It's not
if.
about don't. It's about he doesn't have to. It's not about don't.
But it doesn't spit. But we're searching for a specific. If he beats her, or God forbid, these crazy things. But we're not looking for a specific. But here's where you don't have to give one. That doesn't happen. Nobody says anything about that.
You didn't have to. It's much
Why?
worse than that. It's much worse. You have to give it willingly.
Right.
It's much worse than what you're saying.
But there's no option not to. There's no such thing as that.
Okay, but we can't say that because the halakha doesn't interpret that way. That
Right.
makes
Ricky,
yeah. Yes.
why does the halacha want to keep the women under the men's thumb?
It doesn't. It doesn't. We have to keep a few things in mind here. And this is for a full conversation, not for 1 minute. It's an important conversation. We have to keep a few things in mind. The world is different now. That doesn't mean the Torah should be dated, because it isn't. But the perspective of the Torah, as we understand it, was to free the women from the mundane and to protect the women, not to control the women. Now, the way humanity developed over the last X thousand years, it didn't develop that way. And what Judaism structured as a way to protect who was then the weaker element in society, the woman who didn't have the muscles, so to speak, to protect herself based on ancient society, and then to free her to be that elevated person closest to God, ended up getting distorted in society and became something like you referenced, but that's not the intent. And by the way, if this next Geulah, if this next redemption led by women, maybe some of the people on this call, maybe it brings us to this, what will be the final redemption, which will be moving the women out of this thing. That was never the intent. That was how society took it and spun it, but it's not the intent. It's not what the Torah wanted. So now we have an interesting situation. We have a situation where the community rabbis and many community rabbis and many communities, again, we're not an autocracy. We're all responsible. It ain't the rabbis exclusively, and it ain't me exclusively. It's all of us together. We all bear equal responsibility. So we have a situation where nothing was done for a long time. The voice of the people changed the reality and moved the rabbis to do it. The voice of the people has to continue. At the same time, the voice of the people needs to be intelligent and educated and process oriented, which means I cannot ignore halakha. I cannot. If I end up having a situation where the guy says they absolutely forced me to do it, the lady is in worse shape than ever. We can't have that.
How is she in worse shape? How? But she don't even know.
If she thinks she has a get, and she doesn't.
But she doesn't know it. It's like a tree falling in the forest. She doesn't know she has a bad get.
Maybe she will know it. Maybe she will. Maybe he'll come out a year later and he'll say, "Here, look at the paper. Watch the video. They forced me to do it. I was petrified."
No, I'm saying what's
now
the?
She's married to somebody else, and she had a baby, and the baby is a mamzer.
Right.
That's maybe not less of a nightmare. Maybe not more, but not less. But I'm saying,
Ricky, it's nonsense. I'm not buying it. I'm sorry. It's not pure nonsense.
you can't say we don't take that approach. We don't do that. I won't do that. I'm a person whose life is bounded and directed by halakha. That's how I live. That's my oxygen. That's my love. That's my passion. That's my everything. And
Rick, the history of the get always has people.
One second. I'm with you, Joe. 1 second. When we have a situation like this, freedom comes from intelligence. Freedom doesn't come from a big fist. It comes from an intelligent word, an intelligent approach. And that's where I want you to be.
But why don't we worry about not eating a piece of bread? How come somebody doesn't come running across the room, smack a loaf of bread out of my hand because I washed incorrectly? And they're so concerned, the whole community is concerned with my eating of the bread, that they don't come running, galloping across.
I don't understand your question.
So, but here you have somebody who may have a false get, and everybody's got to get involved in that business. Everybody's got to be there.
You don't want the people to be involved?
No, I'm saying to you, the get's there. The guy washed his hands in both scenarios. He washed his hands. He's about to take a piece of bread, but the whole community is going to rally and say, "Oh, you did it wrong. We can't allow you to do such a avon."
And that okay. Then you're saying maybe the community shouldn't rally.
I'm saying the community should rally on everything if we're going to rally on this one thing, but we don't. Why are they so concerned about this one thing?
Because rally on everything if you want.
I don't think we should.
So that's why we need to know the deal. We need to know.
I don't understand that.
Okay, that's why I'm trying to teach it to you.
So I have a question.
That's what you pay me for, Z.
Right.
I have a comment. When people have get married, they get married under the chuppah with the Shekhinah of Hashem under the chuppah.
Right.
Now you have the get. So why isn't Hashem allowing the man to give the get? Because maybe he has to do it willingly.
Right.
So is he saying that maybe there's a spark of love in his heart, and that's why he will still have a hold on her? But there's another concept that he could be just controlling out of vengeance and out of craziness.
That's right. And that's why, Lisa, you're absolutely right. When people have to scream and shout, the rabbis have to temper it, and everybody needs to take a step forward and then a half a step back, and then 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
I don't even think
That's-
the scream and shout. I feel like the Beit Din can't allow these men to slip out or
Okay,
women to slip out.
But I want to make something clear. A Bet Din, throughout Jewish history, there was so much that was shaped in halakha by the people, where the people brought the rabbis along to something. The classic case in kashrut is that the rabbis way back when allowed to use glass dishes for meat and for milk. But the women in the villages said, if glass dishes are used for meat and milk, even though they're not porous and they don't absorb anything, well, people are going to start to become lax with the laws of kashrut. So the women made the rabbis more strict. And that's halakha today, that we don't use glass dishes, right? So that's why I'm telling you that we need both. We need both. God forbid the people stop screaming, and God forbid the rabbis stop doing their thing. And that's where we need to be. But if we respect the halachic construct, then we can intelligently bring Yeshua, bring the Geulah, right? The women in Egypt understood. They understood that the greatest mitzvah a Jewish person has is to propagate. They understood that. People have to know, if you know the halacha and you'll think it through, there ain't nothing more powerful.
Ricky.
Yeah.
Ricky,
Yeah, Bobby.
yeah, okay. I have a thought. It's something that Debbie mentioned, and you mentioned with the rallies and everything. So in that moment that he wants to give the get and he agrees, that very moment, right? He
Yep.
agrees. I'm thinking, is it sort of similar to like when we're on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and we're trying to do teshuvah, and at that moment we really, really mean it, and God judges us for the moment that we're in. Although a month later we might go back to doing whatever we were doing.
That's fine. You're right.
So
That's
maybe
fine.
at that very moment where he's getting pressure from the community, he really means it. So then it maybe
That's fine. As long as we can establish, as long as the rabbis can establish that the moment that he signed the get was a willful moment.
right. It could be, yeah.
And if the egg hit his house, and I'm not saying throw them or don't, if the egg hit his house a minute before he signed, someone might come up and say that wasn't a willful signature, and therefore the get is pasul. And that's why.
So how long does it stay pasul for? Like,
Once it's pasul forever. It never comes back.
uh-huh.
So that's why the rabbis were very careful to make sure that at the moment that these guys signed, it was a willful moment.
What's the statute of limitations on that? Being able to say claim pasul or not pasul after you sign?
Right, yeah.
I don't know. Where someone would come 6 months or a year later and say it's pasul, would we have to listen to him? My sense is that when he signs the get, he's saying that I'm signing it willfully. At that moment, he's writing in the get that it's a willful signature. Now, despite all this, and I want to move the conversation to the next place. Despite all this, the Gemara says, beat him up until he willfully agrees. Right?
Yeah.
So the Gemara opens the place for the demonstration, so to speak, the outcry and whatever else. So this is where the rabbis throughout time, over the last couple of thousand years, going back to Rabbeinu Tam, who was the grandson of Rashi in the 1100s, 12th century, he came up with some very, very austere, very strict rules to beat the guy up, to throw him out of the kahal, to never let him have an aliyah, to never let him into the synagogue. He came up with very serious things. Now, Rabbeinu Tam is one of the giants of giants, the greatest rabbis ever in Jewish history. He took a very strong position to say, put him in a real bad place so that he tells you, I want to do it. A lot of people agreed with him, and a lot of people didn't agree with him. Yeah, Erwin, you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you just in general, say when there's halakhic, when there's halakhic guidelines on anything in Judaism, and over time, great Torah scholars, let's say like Rav Moshe Feinstein or whoever, when they have a difference of opinions in this area, is there any movement in any of these
It's a
great
beautiful
scholars,
question.
and
Interesting.
how do you hold by him if you wanted to move in that direction?
Beautiful. So the Rav Moshe Feinstein, in fact, that you mentioned his name, was actually one of the people who weighed in on giving these guys a good hard push. He actually
Wow.
was a
Wow.
giant of giants, and that was his perspective. What we're seeing today, I think, is we're seeing the future. We're lagging a little bit behind in our community, but maybe we're catching up now. Maybe it's COVID inspired and whatever. In the state of Israel, we have the first structured government and recognized Batei Din in 2,000 years in our own country. So they've instituted, not with a ton of success, but with a little bit of success, they've instituted things like prison terms for someone who refuses to give the get, overly multiplied child support, denial of medical care. They've attempted a number of different things. They haven't been overwhelmingly successful.
Let's just start.
It's a start. They started to put a dent in this issue. Being that we have a recognized government in a Jewish country that's not yet fully governed by Jewish law, but very, very sensitive to it and growing more sensitive, we, as being in the diaspora, have a greater opportunity that things will change by us as well. Because once they change with the leadership over there, it's going to trickle down over here. We, being in a very organized community, we may get that trickle down sooner than others. But it's only going to happen if people like all of us, all of you, and I'm not trying to rub anybody's ego or anything like that. I want to be very clear that anybody who walks away from this issue is partially responsible for the pain that people may feel. All of us have to know we have no right to walk away from this issue. At the same,
Ricky,
yeah, yes, ma'am.
can the American Beit Din make its own rules? Or like, can we initiate our own ideas? Or
Absolutely.
does it have to stem from
No.
Israel?
Every community's Bet Din does what they want. Every community's Bet Din does what they want. And there's been a little bit of a push and pull between our community and the Chief Rabbinate of Israel for the past 30, 40 years, where in certain cases, the Chief Rabbinate of Israel will say X, and our community's minhag or our understanding of halakha was Y. And, there's been a little bit of a push and pull, but that's actually a good thing. It's a good thing. But
Ricky, can I'm trying to draw an analogy that I can understand the get and its gravity, and I'm trying to think would comparing it. A lot of us would say that a mezuzah, right? That we don't understand the gravity of the mezuzah in our home, but if somebody came that of knowledge and came into our home and said, "You have a pasul mezuzah," everyone in this chat would change it. Everybody, nobody wants to have that in their house. They don't want the bad juju that comes from having a bad mezuzah in your house.
Right.
Is that somehow the same as having a bad get? Is that what we're
a bad get
talking
is
about?
much worse. A bad get is much worse. A bad get is much worse. A bad get means that the marriage is still a marriage, but this lady went ahead and married somebody else. Now her children are mamzerim. That's a catastrophe because you ruined the life of somebody else.
Right.
What about the man? What about when the man gets remarried and has new kids? Are those children mamzerim?
They're
No.
not. They're not. But one other thing we need to keep in mind here, and I think this is also maybe slipping past some of the considerations here. Some of these people who do these things think that God just checked out. So there are many cases in Judaism where a beit din, a beit mishpat, an earthly court, cannot cannot adjudicate, cannot move against a person. Hi, Marielle. Cannot move against a person. But that doesn't mean that God isn't moving against him. And that's another thing we have to keep in mind. And it's a hard thing to swallow because it's painful to think about. But there are cases where, God forbid, someone will murder somebody, and there's not enough evidence to convict him in a human court. That doesn't mean the person is off. We believe that there's a heavenly court. We believe that you can't fool around with the heavenly court. So the fact that some of these people have done what they've done, and you know, they call it like they're walking on two in two worlds, so to speak, thinking that there ain't no God up there. It's childish, because the same way God rewards, God punishes. And even though some people might scam us and might hurt other people terribly and just sneak right through the court system, so to speak, the human court system, they don't sneak through the heavenly court system. And we have to know that. And that doesn't mean we don't fight, but it means that we also don't think in a limited way.
Ricky,
Yep.
going back to when we were talking about, how far do the claims go to, against a man, if he's unwell or beaten her, God forbid, or anything like that. Are there any specific cases throughout any point in Jewish history that we can base, new cases off of? Like
There are so many, Sonny. It's such a great question. There are so many cases. There are so many cases. There's so much written about this. So, and that's why I'm trying to give you the view from up top. I'm trying to give you a view from up top. But we could really study this for, a year.
So the rabbis now, currently, are they going off of those specific cases now when they're sitting at the table around and saying, okay, this is a situation here, we could.
I believe so, but I gave you the fundamentals. It's got to come back to the couple of points that we mentioned tonight.
Ricky, could I just clarify something? And I could be wrong, but my son, who studies a lot, told me. I asked him a few times, why can't the rabbis just make a heter, like either after a certain amount of years or after a certain amount of trying by the women's end to get the get, that the rabbis just give a get, meaning that they're allowed to step in and officiate a get. He told me that, and I want to clarify for the group, assuming that I'm right. The reason there's such a big machloket or big problems about receiving a get for so many years, and the rabbis have basically had their hands tied for so very long, was because this is a mitzvah de oraita, and it's not a mitzvah de rabbanan, where the ones from de rabbanan, they're much more able to, I'm not going to say play with, but, manipulate or find ways ways around it, loopholes. And this one's harder because it's really from Hashem. It's from.
Right, it is. That doesn't mean that, and I agree with what he told you. That doesn't mean that people didn't distort it and misuse it. But yes, that ties.
No, meaning I mean the rabbis are not going to be able to just step in and say, oh, okay, 3 years, we just decided now it's time for you and we're going to allow you to have a get. They're not able to do it.
I will tell you, Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Toledano, a great Sephardic rabbi in the 1930s, he came out with a very novel idea. What he said is that any marriage is al tnai harabanut, that any marriage is conditional to the approval of the rabbis. And therefore, that approval could be yanked at any time. It's fantastic. Brilliant approach. This really goes to your point, Debbie, and to Sonny's point. How much has been written about this. There are hundreds of teshuvot written about this. Rabbi Toledano had a very novel approach. He said it's the nisuin is al tnai, it's conditional, and the condition is controlled by us, the rabbis. And if we decide at some point that we want to change the conditionality and say it doesn't exist anymore, we can do it. Now, that didn't take root in the Jewish community either, although not such a bad idea. It's true, we have less room to work. The rabbis have less room to work. It's true. That doesn't mean that the state of the Jewish community hasn't grown. More courage is needed, and more advanced thinking is needed. And we believe, as always, that we don't have to trash halacha in order to get something fixed. And we will. And all of you and all of us, everyone together, will keep fighting. And what I want you to, I don't want you to be less frustrated, more inspired, or anything like that from this learning tonight. What I want you to be is a little more knowledgeable about the issue. Because as we know, knowledge is power, particularly in Judaism. And if we could shout and at the same time know that we have that caveat of the willingness of the male, now we're in a very different place in terms of the conversation. Now our shouting or our demonstrating or our social media protesting, now it's more knowledgeable. And if it's more knowledgeable, it's going to be more effective.
Ricky,
Go ahead. Sorry, Mrs. Chow. Go.
I'm sorry. Hi, Joey.
Hi, Flora.
I believe in Mexico, when they're getting married, they do have a get in case the marriage does not work out
Right, exactly, yeah.
at the moment of the wedding.
Right, right. And some of the rabbis are doing that here as well. The prenuptial agreement is actually a very, very good idea. It's been around for a long time in Jewish history, for the last couple of thousand years, the prenuptial agreement. The Rabbinical Council of America, the RCA, advocates on behalf of it as well. Many rabbis in our community do. I would strongly recommend for all of our children when they get married to make sure they do it, because there's nothing wrong with it. And to Flora's point, it's prominent in other communities around the world, and it's been a very good tool in the Jewish community in general for a long time. So the prenup agreement is a very good idea.
It's only accepted by
I'm sorry.
a handful of rabbis, which is a problem, and we need to get it accepted by all. I think they don't understand it, and that's why they say no right away. Because I was involved with some of them, and
Let's do this, Joe. Yeah, I don't know. It could be. You could be right. Let's go ahead.
At the same time, I want to say something else. Going upstream, which is a longer term approach to it, doesn't solve any immediate needs, but we need, like you just said, that there's a higher court, Hashem, etc., on this. If you're doing wrong, you're doing wrong. We need to educate our young men from high school days about what this means and what this. We need to create a culture that says that whenever a woman is ready to go, whenever there's a divorce that's happening, the man has to do the honorable thing and give the get right away, because that is the halachic way to handle it. And we have to go, again, I'm saying this is a long-term approach on the upstream, starting from the beginning.
I agree. We have to educate our children first. I agree with you. The third segment of what we're going to do tonight, we'll do another time, in terms of how to protect our children and ourselves. I think we needed the time tonight to first talk about sections 1 and 2, but I think there are some important points, to your point, Joey, and to others, and on how to make sure that we are as resilient as possible in terms of this issue, and our children are as well. And maybe next week or after Pesach, whenever, we'll dedicate a full class to that and share some ideas on that as well. Because you're right, a lot of this is going to change as well by a better guy who gets involved and with a better understanding of what a relationship is, and by us really being maybe even better gatekeepers to our children than we thought we had to be. Maybe we have to be even better gatekeepers. And that's something that I want to talk about, and maybe we'll do it in the next week or two.
Ricky, I have one question before we all depart.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Rick.
When did you show up?
I've been here.
Okay.
I missed the first 20. we can't force someone, we can't force a man to sign a get. We understand that. Can we force a man to sign a prenup? Are the same halakhic rules in place for a prenup as a get?
Beautiful. It's not. There is no beautiful. There is no halachic rule in place for a prenup, and in that case, it's very simple. We're not. This marriage isn't going forward unless you sign it. Very
Yeah,
simple.
I mean that's. I mean, it doesn't solve the problems that we have for people that are already married, but
No.
I think this is a perfect inflection point in our community's time,
I think so.
where we
Too.
can say going forward, this is the way it is.
There is. No, yeah.
I said,
Adrian?
How will the rabbis are on board for that?
How are the rabbis enforcing it?
I said
no, they're not on board.
Some are and some aren't. Right. Some are and some aren't.
Ricky, what's the reason for the rabbis that are not?
I honestly don't know. Does anybody know why some rabbis did talk to it?
Some of them felt that it was forcing the man. It would put the man in a position where he was forced to give the get. And
beautiful. That's a very good point. Then it goes back to the original point that you can't.
But if they were to look at the actual document, because it was not really studied by them, if they look at the actual document, it's only forcing them to do what they signed on the.
They already signed, so there's no forcing. They already signed.
There's no. They already signed, but also, what's the other thing?
When we signed the ketubah, we're also agreeing to certain.
It only said that they have to provide what they said in the ketubah, which is food and shelter. $150 a day. They don't go. They're not going to a higher amount, which would make it a forced situation. Only coming to what they halachically are obligated to do.
Fine. Great. Good. I think the prenup concept will take root. It'll take greater root in the community. But to your point, now I understand, because I think Stephen asked what their concern was. I guess the concern is that it might be construed as forcing the hand of the husband, and therefore wouldn't get the job done.
Yeah.
So
But we force the man, let's say, when he's signing the ketubah, we force him to provide for his wife, right?
We don't force him. We don't force him.
But
he
in the
signs the
same
ketubah
context.
screen, I read the ketubah and I understand what my responsibilities are. And that's different than forcing him. If you force someone to sign the ketubah, I don't know if that ketubah would be enforceable. I'm not sure, but we don't force them.
They're not forced to sign to get the bag, not forced to sign the prenup. Both of them are signed willingly at the time of marriage.
Willingly, exactly. Once it's signed, you can argue that it's a willing effort, right?
Rick, is the ketubah sort of like comparable to a promissory note, or like?
Yeah, I would say so.
Right.
Yeah, it's a promissory note. It's food, shelter, caring, a certain amount of minimal,
Right.
caring for a woman's emotional and physical needs, and that's what we're into.
Yeah.
Ricky, oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, you could put the dollar amount into the ketubah.
We put a minimal amount. A lot of people now put more than the minimal amount. So it's really up to the family. Some people like to show higher regard for the bride and put more than a minimal amount in. And that's what I'm sure many of you have done and we've done.
But it's not simply a monetary.
No,
it's not simply a monetary thing.
No, it's not. That's why I said the physical needs and the emotional needs of the bride.
Is there any place or any way or that's carved out or possible where it takes? I mean, I have 4 daughters, right? So for me to imagine.
That's why he's beating the drum so hard.
To imagine them having a future that's potentially where they have this kind of potential future is awful for me to think about. And I'd love to imagine that there is some way to find where the I speak for all and I don't want to be speaking for all the women in the room, but I think that everybody wants to hear an answer that says it's not going to be up to that particular man, because you might have one good man, but then the other guy might not be.
I want to say like this, and this is for part 3, which is going to be another conversation, God willing. we never stop parenting, ever.
Right.
In the Syrian community, specifically, we never stop parenting. And
You said that to me.
that's a very good thing. And we should never even think we semi-stop parenting, because if we do, we're going to hurt our children. And that means that the level of attentiveness, of awareness that we place when our children are dating and who they bring into the home, in my opinion, is just not where it needs to be.
Right.
And one of the takeaways here is, and one of the things that we'll discuss in the future, is a heightened awareness, simple but effective insights that I believe will help all of us to make sure that that person who walks in the door we're never going to be 100% right, but we're going to get it just about 100% right. And I think that, to Joey Shami's point, in terms of all the facets of this thing, I think the prenup is essential, and building a child along a certain path is essential, and parenting with a very high level of awareness, without the sense that, oh, I live in the Syrian community and everybody's a good guy. I don't know if they are, and they might be, but they might not be good enough. And that difference between good and good enough could be where the friction is between two young people.
Sometimes the parents are very influential, as we've seen, in a negative way.
That's true too. That's right. That's true. You're absolutely right, Adrian. That's right. So that's not something that we want to be doing, but we need to be very aware and alert and involved in who walks in the door. And we need to vet that person with a very, very real level of attention. And what people do sometimes is they take the word of others who they trust over their own gut, which someone should never do. Sometimes people are blinded by wealth or notoriety or position in the community to think that that brings with it quality. Sometimes it does, but it doesn't always. Other times, the person could be a pretty good person, but the values articulated by family X are just simply not the same. So that needs to be vetted out as well. So we have the voice of the people, particularly our women. We have the challenges and opportunities of the rabbis. They need to work hand in hand with friction and conflict and cooperation. And then we have our jobs as parents. And that's the part that we'll dedicate a full class to next time and share ideas on that. Good. So, great to see everybody as always. Any other questions? Laura, great to have you back. We missed you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be back.
Good. All right, Beth, thank you. Make it a regular, huh?
Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Gailey, thank you.
Of course, my pleasure.
Gailey, love you, baby.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Ricky.
Thank
And
you.
Mabruk.
Thank you, Abel. Thank you.
Oh, Mabruk.
Thank you.
Gorgeous.
Thank you, Joe. Good things, everybody. Bella.
Amen.